Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of State of Quake. As always, I'm Slip.
And I'm Unkind. Thanks for joining us. Now sit back and let's see where the Slipgate takes us. I wanted to kick things off by giving a huge thanks to all of our listeners and the community at large for the continued support. The best compliment that you can give to us is by liking, following, subscribing to us wherever you may be tuning in from. If you enjoy our content and what we're doing for the community, please help by spreading the word and sharing it with your friends and other players. You could also catch us on Twitch at twitch.tv/stateofquake. We've been pretty active the past couple of months hosting weekly community events, mostly on Saturday nights. You can always catch us at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've been doing a King of the Hill. We've done dual bracket events. We've done something called a blind date 2v2, where you're paired up with a random teammate. And as you know, the chemistry between the two players gets better and better throughout the night. It's a pretty exciting event. And we've also got a dual event called Diamonds in the Rough that's only open to Gold 5 players and below, so they can get their feet wet and give them an opportunity to get some experience in a tournament setting. So last week we posted the first episode of In the Keep. It's an interview-focused podcast for the Arena FPS community at large, and it's hosted by the Motherlode of Cathala's Keep. If you haven't yet checked that out, please do, and show the Motherlode some love. Also, we wanted to thank everyone who entered to win the Scale Bear statue that we were giving away. We drew for the winner, and it ended up being Swearing Cashew, so congratulations to him. But anyway, let's get on with the show here. I want to announce that we have a very special guest joining us today.
Hey, I'm happy to be back. I've been waiting a long time.
Whoa. Not you, man.
Sir, wait. Come on.
Who is that?
You're a very special guest.
It's
D-Ron.
You're just D-Ron. Sit down. Sit down.
All right, I'll take a seat.
Anyway, let me back up. I want to announce that we have a very special guest with us. I'm thrilled to have him on the show. He's no stranger to being interviewed or the interviewer. He's been a pillar of the Quake community for over 10 years. He's a seasoned caster. He's been on the big stage at Quakecon, Dreamhack, basically every major Quake esports event. He's the host and creator of TastySpleenTV. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Jehar.
Doot.
Hey, buddy.
So welcome, sir. Without you, I don't think Slip and D-Ron and myself, Unkind, would have met.
Is there a party that I forgot?
Yeah, the party that
we all met up.
you used to throw every Wednesday and Friday.
Yeah, King of the Hill will come back. It's just been a little bit of a hibernation period towards the end of the year, but yeah, as kind of we figure out what the schedules are for other events, then we'll be good.
Awesome.
Fantastico.
But yeah, we just wanted to first off thank you for hosting that. I know that's something that you've been doing for a very long time. Most of the Quake community should know who you are, but we do have some new blood. Feel free to give a little bit of background as to who you are and what you do.
Yeah, as far as intros go, you did a really fantastic job of summing things up. You're reminding me how old I am, how long I've been here, and how short of a time I have left on this planet. So thank you. Quake kind of has a way of aging you. I don't know what it is, but by the time you hit your late 20s, you've already had several midlife crises. I've only experienced that with Quake players, nobody else. I don't know what it is.
I'm in the midst of one right now, actually.
Oh yeah, what did you buy?
A gaming computer. I had children and decided to take a break from Quake, and now I'm back with this iteration.
Buying mice every single weekend.
Yeah, that's his vibe. Like every day, it's like on eBay. What can I find that's on sale here?
I'm like the rocket jump redneck.
I mean, Quake does take a lot out of you. It's an emotionally demanding game. It's an emotionally demanding community, present company notwithstanding. And yeah, I mean, everybody kind of has ebbs and flows, but everybody keeps coming back, which is why to this day, you know, like Quake World players are all in their second mortgage and they're still playing together. You know, they've cheated on each other's wives and they're still playing together. Quake 2 players are mostly potheads, so they float in and out. But they always come back. Even like a few weeks ago, Railwolf popped his head up. Haven't seen his face in a long time. And even on streams, like you see somebody enter chat and you're like, wow, that's a name I've literally not seen in a decade. So nobody ever really leaves.
It's awesome to see old familiar faces pop back in.
I think he's pretty much saying Quake is crack in a way. Like once you're hooked, you're coming back regardless.
There are programs to get off of crack. I don't know of any programs to get off of Quake.
Just more Quake, sir. More Quake.
Yeah.
I need it.
All right, so let's get back on track here. We're gonna start off with some easy stuff because we got a lot of info that we want to get out of you. But
boy.
One thing that I was always curious about was how did you get your gamer tag, Jehar?
Well, as far as etymology goes, it doesn't mean anything. It was just 2 syllables that I thought sounded kind of cool together. But I started going by that name when I was 11 years old on a mud. And I'm about to unironically use this phrase for those of you who are younger out there. A mud was a multi-user dungeon, which was pretty much a precursor to an MMO that was only text-based. And it was a Lord of the Rings-based one. It's still running, t2t.org. It's good shit. But I was going by the name Teijing for a long time. And a friend of mine, a good friend of mine up until this point, thought it was a great name. So he registered an account with that name and he started just using it. So I had to come up with something else if I wanted to keep playing the same game. So I did that. And I've been going with it ever since.
This is much better, to be fair, than Tajin.
Thank you. I mean, I was like 7 years old when I came up with that one. So give me a break. But I guess since I've been doing this since I was 11, yeah, I've used this name for more years than I guess I exclusively use my real name. That's a sobering thought.
So when are you going to go legally change your name to Jehar on your driver's license?
No, I've never been. I mean, you know guys in high school who are like, don't call me Nate, call me Blood Dragon or Shadow Moon or something like that. And I was never like one of those kids, but Rotten Rose has, you'll know when she's angry at me because she'll call me Jehar when she's actually mad. And she'll introduce me to other people as Jehar sometimes. And I actually got into my current workplace because of somebody I knew through Quake who introduced me by Jehar to my coworkers who now call me Jehar for no. I never asked for this, but here we are.
It's happening already. I'm just picturing you in high school slamming some kid up against the locker saying, "Call me Jehar, damn it. You better do it."
No, I was definitely on the other side of the locker equation. Well, but I didn't shoot anybody, so it's all good news.
Hard pause. Speaking of Rotten Rose, how did you guys meet?
College, first day college, coffee line. She bought me coffee. That's all I needed. Yeah.
Has she always been into like gaming, or did you get her into this stuff?
I brought her to Quakecon in 2007, and bringing a significant other to Quakecon is always a bit of a risk, right? It's like a litmus test. Like, all right, if this goes poorly, it's gonna suck. But by the end of it, she's way more social than I am, so she ended up knowing more people than I did by the end of her first year. So yeah, I mean, it's really her event.
Wow. The truth is out, people.
He gambled and won.
One of the things that I read while, looking up some research on you is that you actually proposed to her at QuakeCon. I thought that was pretty romantic.
Yeah, well, to like soften the whole romantic side of it, it was like we knew what our plans were. It wasn't like a surprise to anybody, so I figured I might as well do something fun just for shits and giggles. But no, it was a Quake 2 map, and it's still out there on the TastySpleen server somewhere. And I was actually having a few problems with it, so after like the keynote with John Carmack, I asked him for some advice, and he gave me some advice, and that was nice. That was really cool. It's always cool talking to John Carmack. The guy's literally a god. But the whole gimmick of the level was that, we would just hop in, everybody would play some deathmatch for a few minutes, and then at some point I would sneak to a location on the map that had a secret button, and I would push that button, and that would make the whole level shake, because that was a thing you could do in Quake 2, and you could make, some brushes fall down from the sky saying, "Will you marry me?" and have some explosions go off with those wonderful Quake 2 model explosions. And 2 things went terribly wrong with that. First off, a clanmate, Deathstalker, he found the button immediately, like within the first 18 seconds of us playing. And of course, it's a button, so you're going to go, hey, what's that button do? So that kind of ruined that whole, pacing. And then Rotten Rose had her headphones off, so she didn't even know there were words in the sky and explosions going off and all the sound effects I'd spent hours on. So I had to tell her, look up, dumbass. I may or may not have used those exact words, but yeah, it was awkward. But we were young. I can pretend that anything has changed since then, but not really. It was fun though.
It's definitely a memorable moment that you guys can cherish for the rest of your lives.
By this point at Quakecon, they had the whole quick draw tournament thing where two people would randomly get drawn up to duel each other. That was a cool event, by the way. I wish that could get brought back in some form or whatever. It was usually a lot of drunk people towards the end. It was great, but it had become a bit of a meme that at the end they would have two people come up and they would propose to each other and be like, oh, they proposed to each other at Quakecon. So Rotten Rose explicitly told me, do not do that, or that's it. It's done. So I had to get rid of this.
So let's take another step back, I guess.
Oh, boy.
We can all admit that we're probably addicted to playing Quake in some way, shape, or form.
It's a problem.
But it's not a problem.
No.
What hooked you? What was your first experience like with Quake multiplayer? And I know D-Ron, specifically put emotionally. he wants to go deep. What did you feel?
I'm an emotional guy, man.
When did you feel that tingle down low when you first playing Quake? Let me
Well,
know. Hands.
It was a bit of a weird path getting into Quake itself, but by the time I did, it was because I was interested in architecture and level design, and I had done a lot of Doom stuff prior to that. So when I got into Quake, my first question was, it's always better when you make a multiplayer level and you see other people actually playing in it. That was what was really emotionally driving for me.
That's the reward, yeah.
It's fucking cool, man. You get other people in. You get people making fun of your texture alignment. It's a rush. It's great. And so the question was, and this was actually pretty late in all things considered, so 2005 or so. And the question was, what Quake could I play and make maps for that would actually have people play? And I look at Quake 3, and all the servers ran the same CPM packs or the same OSP packs, and Quake 3 has pure servers, so it's a bit of a pain in the ass to get new content, and the amount of custom content wasn't very varied on Quake 3 servers. And then Quake World, the same thing to an extreme. Quake World players still consider only 5 maps to be canonical, and some Quake players only think that 3 of those are actually worth anything, and the other 2 are fakes and phonies, including Blood Run. Blood Run came out too late to be considered a proper Quake map. So nobody was really going to play anything custom in Quake World. Nobody was really going to play anything custom in Quake 3. But I found the TastySpleen servers run by Quads to this day, forum servers, everything that came out of the old X-Quake stuff. And not only was there a plethora of servers with all kinds of different mods loaded up, there was the Mutant server, which was actually on the default port. And that was just a playlist of 300-400 custom maps. And first off, it's a friggin' treasure trove of just content to find and play through. You can really just go on a great virtual trip through all the maps on there, and it's a really cool thing to find, especially with some of the map makers. And people were submitting maps on the forums all the time, and Quads would just throw them up on the server, no big deal. And so that was oh, cool, here's a group of people I could actually make content for and play with. And that was it for me. That was it. And then I met some of those guys online doing the TS 500 event, which was a 500 frag limit FFA. And if that doesn't hook you, nothing will. I saw orange for hours after that because I didn't know how to adjust my Quake 2 light settings at that time. And then met, the clan BTF and Deathstalker, who was the button pusher I mentioned. He encouraged me to come to Quakecon, and I did. And that was it. That was all it took.
So safe to say Quake 2 is your favorite version?
So obviously I'm going to feel a little bit biased there, right? But over years of doing commentary and tournaments and playing a lot of Quake World and Quake 2 and Quake 3, and a little bit of Quake 4, I still really do think Quake 2 has several unique properties that nothing else really brings to the table. Ironically, it's my least favorite single player game. And right now I'm actually sitting next to like one of the, world record holders for Quake 2 speedruns, but single player Quake 2 is kind of trash. But multiplayer is amazing. It was really the last game that had just like purely dumb clients, so that you had to lead your shots a bit if you were lagging, and for a long time I was. But you knew that everybody would see the rocket at the same place at roughly the same time, and that felt great. And the weapons were balanced, and because of the number of weapons and backpacks and hand grenades and power shields and all the different power-ups, and you could have maps that would play completely differently from each other depending on what items you had in there. It still had tiered armor like Quake World did. So you would have some maps that would have red armor and some maps that wouldn't have red armor, and because they had different protection values, it would feel like a totally different game. And that variety was really the lifeblood of Quake 2, and still is. Quake 2 was really the peak of custom user content.
So we know Quake 2 is probably your favorite, but if you had to pick a least favorite, which one would you pick, and kind of like why would you say it's your least?
Wow, it's like picking a least favorite Dark Souls. I mean, everybody knows what the answer is, but it's still better than most of the drivel that exists outside of the franchise. I mean, nobody really plays Quake 4, but every time I duel Quake 4, especially on maps like Frantic or Placebo Effect, it really is special and it is unique. All right, you didn't know you were going to ask a controversial question, but here we go.
Okay, nice.
Quake 3 was a mistake.
Oh,
there were several things. There were several things about the design of Quake 3 that were made to be streamlined, but it took a lot of the soul out of it. Like things that had worked in Quake World and Quake 2 that were just taken out. Things like the mega timing working the way it is, armor working the way it was, the variety of weapons, the balance of the weapons. Quake 3 movement is just Quake 2 movement with all the tricks taken out. Like vanilla Quake 3 movement, there's some things you can do with it, but there's a reason why CPMA took off like it did.
Yeah, that is true. The mod scene after Quake 3, was released, I think was more popular than vanilla.
And that's true of all Quakes, and that's kind of the element of Quake that made it so special, was that id Software would always release the games in a complete stable state, but not a whole lot of content. Like when Quake came out, when Quake 2 came out, Duel wasn't in there, TDM wasn't in there, CTF certainly wasn't in there. All of these things were mods. Everything was a mod. OSP gave us, competitive features. 3-Wave gave us Capture the Flag. And these aren't only mods that, are still game types today. These are mods that became entire franchises in the future. Like the entire game industry was built off the back of Quake mods. Everything you play that is like a Source engine game or, anything in Unreal engines, a lot of it comes from Quake mods. Like, I mean, the obvious one is TF2, of course, but things like Left 4 Dead, Counter-Strike, all that crap, it all started with Quake. And it all started because the tools were there and the engine was flexible enough to allow for, not only replacing content, but replacing logic, replacing code, extending it with source ports. And that applied to Doom as well. So, yeah, I mean, id Software always released Quake, Quake 2, Quake 3, Quake 4 in a relatively okay state, but that's not really what made the games work. It was everything that came after.
And that's a stark contrast to our latest Quake game.
It is. That does kind of bring us into the present era, which, things have changed.
Yeah, we'll probably dig a little bit deeper into that later on in the episode.
Sounds like fun.
I'm just still surprised you're saying Quake 3. I was like, God, this guy's going to say Quake 4 like everybody else.
That's what I thought too, man. I was a little shocked by that. I mean, Quake 3, the base Quake 3 was, like he said, I mean, it's basic. And then all the mods were what made that great, I think.
I mean, Quake 3, at the very least, had an attempt at like a dual mode and a TDM mode, and I think a little bit of CTF in there on the CD, but nobody used them because that implementation was kind of crap. Right. And it wasn't until we got a version of Campgrounds that didn't have red armor and mega health and a ton of ammo on the pillars. It wasn't until we got Pro Q3 DM6 that it was like, okay, we can actually do some real duels on this.
Right.
But on the same token, id Software never really needed to be concerned about releasing things with, the right competitive features because, OSP would do it or CPMA would do it or somebody else would do it.
The engine is what drove the community,
Yeah. Yeah, it was really. I mean, it is the bedrock of not only so many, like spin-off mods, but also so many spin-off engines. Like, of course, Source's Quake down in the bottom. Call of Duty still runs on Quake 3 fundamentally. I mean, there are countless numbers of source ports that have turned into their own projects. Things like Zoonotic, we were talking about a little bit earlier, Urban Terror, Warsaw, Jedi Academy. Yeah, I mean, the licensed games for the Quake engine stuff too. And that's really what Quake 3 was best at, was licensed stuff. A lot of really good content came out of that. It was really the center of PC gaming in terms of first-person shooter stuff for a long time. And it worked well, and it worked efficiently. And it was one of those rare sets of engines where the more hardware you throw at it, the better it runs. And that's not true of everything. And it means that there's a lot of games that are really difficult to play now because they weren't based on something that John Carmack thought up.
The legend.
Yeah.
So here's another difficult question. And it might not even be that difficult for you, but Doom or Quake?
Okay. Shit. So Quake is like this amalgamous, is that even a word, amalgamous? It's this really holistic, cohesive thing because, you talk about Quake World, you get into Quake 2, Quake 3, etc. So it is like this whole universe of content and people and competition. As far as like single player, sit down, play E1, M1 of either game goes, the difficulty with Quake was that it was moving to polygonal enemies. And so it meant that you couldn't have 50 imps on a screen at the same time. You could have an ogre and maybe a couple grunts. And so each individual enemy got a little bit tankier, could soak up a few more hits. Placement of enemies was really important, which is something that Quake was rather good at. But it meant more of an emphasis on fighting individual monsters instead of fighting like this Robotron-esque horde of monsters. And that just means that they're different games in my mind. Like, they're different genres. It's like comparing Mario to, Turrican or something. It's like, oh yeah, they're both side-scrolling platformers, but to call them the same game, there's not a whole lot of commonality there. So yeah, Doom, because nothing else really does what Doom does. Maybe Blood.
Good answer.
Every question is loaded.
With my experience, my background, I started off with Doom and Doom 2 modding as well.
Yeah.
And so that holds a special place in my heart. And, finding Quake and doing Quake multiplayer and the community aspect of it is what drew me towards Quake as well. So I can't pick one.
And really, I mean, Doom is phenomenally active when it comes to custom content. It is probably the most prolific of all of them. And there are so many high-quality projects from vanilla-esque levels that are just really good level design and don't really do anything special to, shit like QCDE, which, it stands out there and it's amazing. And it is really, really special and good, but it's not abnormal in the Doom community to have something that high quality. So hats off to him.
I recently installed that. I enjoyed playing it. I need to figure out some of the commands and how to set the mouse up to be more reactive.
Yeah. I mean, anything with especially older games in general, but especially Quake, there's a little bit of, you got to be willing to get into some config files and futz around with things until things feel right, because, Quake feels more right than most things. So you got to tweak it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. QCDE, I've been following along. I've been playing it here and there. It's definitely a great break from the actual Quake Champions game, but within the Doom engine, they're just adding all of the things that people wish they had. I guess within.
It's ridiculous how much content there is.
Yeah, wish they could keep up on id side.
Well, I mean, that's part of the appeal of doing Doom maps and Doom mods. Is it's all sector-based mapping, which is easy. You want a cube room, draw a box, push F5. Congratulations, you made your first map. It's okay. You got to do 2 cubes, but it's a really short path. And putting in more enemies, cool. Do some sprite grabs. I mean, it's so simple from an asset standpoint.
Yep. So, what is your background? Like, how have you just always have an interest or a knack in doing maps, or have you ever been trained in anything associated with that? Like, I just want to get a bit of info on what drew you towards the mapping aspect of games.
Well, obviously, I didn't stick with it. Otherwise, we'd probably be having a different conversation. And part of me wishes I had, because it is still just endlessly fascinating to me. But I don't know. Video games to me have always been about exploring. That's why The Legend of Zelda was such a huge deal. And even things like Simon's Quest, I didn't know when I was like 6 years old how much of a buggy ass broken game that was. I just thought it was like bigger than I could comprehend, which was so cool. And yeah, I mean, Doom and Quake are both great opportunities for exploration, and being able to create these worlds, fuck yeah, that's really cool shit.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Like the exploration and, you know, just being able to express yourself creatively, and, you know, this where the sky is the limit. You know, kids these days, they have Minecraft. My son is a prime example of that. Without, you know, just putting him in a sandbox mode and letting him build whatever he wants, and at the end of the day, seeing what he comes up with, like it brings back those special memories that drew me towards, I guess, what I've taken from back then all the way up till, you know, now. Like I can still to this day say that I love building things and exploring, even within, you know, my professional career. So all those people out there who, you know, enjoy modding and building and all that stuff, keep it up. You could have a career in it.
Yeah, it is a little bit more difficult today, and probably the same kinds of things that you would accomplish and learn via modding, you're now learning through, well, like you said, Minecraft, and probably a few other avenues, maybe like mobile development or something like that. But there's a lot to be said. Sure. I just have no real idea. I've watched some videos of like some, you know, Mr. Bones Wild Ride type stuff on Roblox, and I'm like, wow, that's a crazy world.
We should do the Quake version of Roblox. My kids will love it. My daughters play Roblox.
That is cool.
My son, he
not really. It's not that cool.
Constantly, he's like, "Hey, Dad, I'm playing Quake." I'm like, "No, you're not."
That's not it. Don't pretend.
I sat him down at the computer. I said, "This is Quake."
Speaking of that, I actually had my son playing Quake Champions with me last weekend when he was here, and I was just kind of dominating him without trying. He's like, "This isn't fun. I don't want to play this anymore." So I'm trying to teach you, trying to show you the way.
You have to be a little bit of a masochist, yeah, to get into that. I hope something like Roblox has kind of that bare level of entry, because the great thing about modding is that in order to make a mod, you can do something as small as, you know, change an imp's eyes from red to green, you know, do like a few pixels on a few different sprites and open it up in the game and see what you did in the game. And that's really cool. And then you go, oh, well, what else can I do? Can I give the imps Crocs? Can I like put them in sandals? And it kind of goes from there. Which compared to, you know, doing something in Unity or UE4, you gotta not exactly start from scratch. There's a lot of really good tools out there, but there's a lot to be said for just taking a game that you're already interested in, that you already are familiar with, and then like taking the smallest baby steps of making it yours.
I know you said with mapping, you don't really do that anymore. So I guess as far as other background stuff, like what kind of got you into the casting, commentating kind of role that you're in today?
DJ Wheat. Yeah. That's all it took. Watching some Radio ITG, or rather listening to Radio ITG on Winamp, and then connecting to a Quake server and just spectating from there. That was the coolest shit. I don't know what it was. It was social, but a little bit passive too, and just following the action. And it was kind of a weird road, to be honest. And it all ties back to Quakecon, where I had done a little bit of stuff on radio. TastySpleenTV started off as the TastySpleen TastyCast, which was a radio station on tastyspleen.net, and did a little bit of commentary there, some like map reviews, some like interviews, like really basic stuff on Audacity and whatever. Nothing really live. But then I've met a few people from Quake Unity. I don't know if that name will mean anything to anybody, but did a few video shoots for them, you know, shooting some of the keynotes. And the next year, they were meant to work with Quake Live TV to share some content so that, you know, Quake Unity would record some content and Quake Live TV would run it on their stream. And we had like talked a few times before QuakeCon. I show up there and I'm looking for the Quake Unity people, and we were only ever pseudo professional. They were kind of off doing their own thing and super drunk by that point. And I was just kind of lost and was like, oh, where do I go? And I met up with the Quake Live TV guys, and they're like, well, until you figure out what's going on with them, hang out with us. And I was like, oh, okay. And a lot of this credit goes to Grease Scotsman, which is a name that, if you don't know, you absolutely should know it. He really did build a lot of Quake broadcasting from the early days of streaming on Ustream.
Yeah, I know that guy. I remember him.
Yeah, great guy. He's an adult now. He's got wife and kids and a job and all that. And
adulting.
Yeah, no kidding. But at that time, he just said, "Hey, you've done a little bit of commentary, right?" And I'm like, yeah. Well, then hop on the mic with me. We'll do this match together. I'm like, "Whoa, okay." And that was it. And I cannot emphasize how important it was for him to like barely have met me and have no idea who this stupid kid is, and just go, yeah, just hop on the mic. It's all good. And really casually just accept me into the fold. And from there, you meet the rest of the Quake Live TV crew, Slava and Cymek and Matcom and eventually Fistix. That's kind of where we met. And everything kind of grew from that. And the crazy thing about not only commentary, but like anything involving audio video is that once you get bit by that bug, you buy a mic and you're like, oh, this mic is fine. But that mic that's twice as expensive, I kind of want that now. And then you get that and you're like, oh, this mic is really cool. And oh, but look at that mic. Yeah. honey, get the checkbook. And then that's just your life from then on. Like, you're always looking for some new hardware to exploit, some new trick to do in video editing, new people to work with to kind of do the things that you're not as good at. And that is incredibly addictive.
So is that why you created Tasty Spleen? Like, basically a way to satisfy all of these urges, like, to use the hardware to
a little bit. And part of that, again, putting most of the credit on somebody else's shoulders, because they had the resources and they just let me use them. Quads, who created Tasty Spleen itself, had so much web hosting space available to him because he was running the servers. And all in all, it didn't take up much hard drive space, just a few mods and maps and whatever. And he just let people in the community run websites off of tastyspleen.net. And so that's where I started the radio station from. And then at that point, that was about the time Planet Quake was shutting down, or shall I say, getting shut down by IGN. And not just getting shut down, but like getting nuked from orbit. So all of the mods, all of the articles, all of the hosted sites on Planet Quake, like, they were very soon to be gone. And unless they got archived specifically, they just are totally lost to the wind. There's a lot of content that we're never going to get back, unfortunately. Right. But the special thing about Planet Quake was, if you were a Quake 1 player, if you were a Quake 2 player, if you're a Quake 3 player, that was your common ground. You would at least, even if you weren't interested in something like Quake 2, you would at least see Quake 2 news on Planet Quake.
Yeah, I remember Planet Quake.
Yeah, it would just ambiently be there. And there was a sense of community behind that and a sense of cohesion. Because, of course, when Quake World came out and then Quake 2 came out, there were a lot of people who started playing Quake 2 who had never played Quake before, so that was their first Quake. There were a lot of people who moved from Quake World to Quake 2. There are a lot of people who stuck with Quake World because they thought Quake 2 was shit and had footsteps and had a railgun and it was too slow. And that same thing happened when Quake 3 came out. And that same thing happened when Quake 4 came out. And before that, Doom 3, which spawned, Doom World a little bit. Yeah, not Doom World, but Planet Doom for a little bit. But you had people getting left behind at these specific games because they thought that this game got it right. And that's really awesome. I mean, the people who are still playing Quake World play Quake World because they think Quake World is the perfect game. And I'm not going to tell them it's not, because, it kind of is. And it's important to realize that as, other people move on to other games or other franchises, that there's more in common between Quake 2 players and Quake World players. And the fact that you just don't play the same game doesn't mean you don't need to be in the same community. Sure. And so that's kind of what maybe the ideal behind anything I was doing with like radio or eventually video commentary is that, yeah, especially like Warsaw at the time, Like, yeah, let's make sure that Quake 2 people know what Warsow's about, and let's make sure that Doom 2 people know what Quake World is, and let's make sure that Quake 3 people know what Doom 2 is, and get all those connections going. And you don't really get much of a payoff, especially monetarily, but you do get people talking to each other who otherwise wouldn't be talking to each other, and that always feels good.
That's how we kicked this off. Like,
yeah,
Slip, Diron, and I would not have been talking to each other if it wasn't for us having that common ground to actually interact with one another.
Oh, well, so 2 things. First, basically, you're saying casting and commentating was more of a drunken mistake, because if those guys would have got drunk and left you, this would have never happened.
Yeah, I mean, I found them eventually, but they weren't in a state to be any use to me for the rest of the QuakeCon weekend. So I just hung out with the Quake Live TV people after that, and it kind of spun off from there.
Then the second thing is, so basically what I'm kind of saying is, you've created State of Quake. We've done nothing. You've created this. So
no,
in many aspects, he has.
I don't know. It always feels a little bit uphill, and part of it is because I remember what Planet Quake was like. And Pappy R, who ran Planet Quake for a long time, he still pops into streams from time to time and says, "Hey," and he threw a few like old T-shirts at us, and I mean, they belong in a museum, not on my wall. But I remember what Planet Quake was like, and I don't think, with the way just culture moves and time moves, I don't think we're ever going to get that back. But it's okay, because again, like, we're all getting older. I was going to go somewhere with that. Oh, shit, I forgot how I was going to end that statement. But I think there's a lot of value in maintaining these things, and there are waves to it. I mean, there are times of relative inactivity in any given Quake, and then there will be times when like one tournament sparks another league, and for a while there's maybe a few hundred more people playing than otherwise would be. And a game's never really dead as long as whenever you want to play a duel in Quake World, or you want to play some Quake 2's CTF, you can. And that's actually why Quads runs TastySplane. Is like, I just wanted some place where anytime I wanted to play Quake 2, I could. And that's the most important thing.
I've never looked at it like that. That's a brilliant perspective.
Yeah, it's deep too.
I mean, I don't always want to play a Quake 2 duel, but whenever I want to play a Quake 2 duel, I can. I can find somebody, or I could just hop on a server, and there'll be some obsessive dude who's always kind of camping the server, and he'll be on there.
Never did.
Hell, whenever I hop on Quake 4 with Deadbeat, there's always like 3 or 4 other people who kind of like filter in and be like, "Oh, cool, there's somebody on the server. Let's play." And you lose a whole weekend like that, and that's awesome.
Yeah, I enjoyed Quake 4. I wouldn't say it was my favorite, but it was definitely fun. And I didn't really get the hate for it either, though. Like, I mean, I understood that Quake 3 had all the mods, and it was like people were heavily rooted into that, and I was heavily rooted into that. But when Quake 4 came out, I almost anticipated everybody moving to Quake 4, and no one really did.
Yeah, it came out at a really awkward time where esports was still about pushing new hardware. And when a new game comes out, you go to that game because it's the new game and it's come out and it's new. That's kind of what killed Enemy Territory, because when ETQW came out, that pretty much like killed the ET scene. And then Quake 4 came out at about the same time. And gameplay-wise, especially out of the gate, it was very vanilla Quake 3. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of difference there. It was kind of uglier because the way the lighting worked, and it ran like shit because it was running on a much more complex engine. And so a lot of people were like, why don't I just play Quake 3 and get 4 times the frame rate?
Right.
And the same gameplay.
And then Q4 Max came out, and that improved the game vastly.
It did, and it's quite good now. It just came out too late for Quake 4. I think if you look at the times where, like, okay, how long was Quake around before Quake World? How long was Quake 2 around before, like, the few patches that really got it off the ground? How long was Quake 3 around before OSP came out? I think Q4 Max came out at about the same kind of timing, but the industry was changing, culture was changing, more games were coming out all the time, and yeah, audiences just wouldn't wait.
Right.
Thank God that never happened again.
Bringing it back to you mentioned Ustream. That's the platform that you used to use to actually stream these events. And what we're currently using, I guess, as the main platform to stream games these days, Twitch. How do you compare the two, and how did you see the evolution of that happening since you've been around?
Because back with Ustream, like obviously nobody had any idea how to do anything. The gap between proper broadcast media and an internet stream was massive at the time, and streaming a game, especially a high frame rate game with a lot of movement and a lot of frame to frame, changes, it was tough for encoders. And we had to use Flash Media Live encoder, usually without any real capture hardware. And if you wanted to capture HDMI, that would be several, not hundreds, but thousands of dollars. So the first capture card I actually had was a S video capture card, which was 640 by 480, 800 by 600, but with some tearing. So I never did that. And, bandwidth was shitty. So I was streaming at like 700 kbit, which is why, I used so much PicMip, and why everybody used so much PicMip in early days of streaming, just because otherwise the game was totally illegible. And so, yeah, hardware was tough. It wasn't until like the Sandy Bridge processors came around that they could actually crunch H.264 without just peaking out the entire machine. So it was tough doing any kind of video streaming back then. And one of the things I think younger viewers will kind of be shocked at and just not believe is most of the feedback we got at the time was, why would we watch a shitty stream of Quake when we could just watch it in game on QTV? And we had to defend the fact that we were trying to expose the game to people who didn't have the game installed. Mm-hmm. And was like, well, that's just stupid. If they don't have the game installed, then they're not worth our time and our attention. Now, I can understand that position. It's just incorrect.
There's always been kind of an elitist.
I'm one of them. Yeah, I am definitely one of them. Even among Quake,
we all are.
I'm a curmudgeon-y bastard. Like I'm one of the worst. But that was one of the first big hurdles to get over beyond anything technical, was just, what is the point of streaming Quake? And to me, it was like, oh, well, you can make it, you can add like, videos in between rounds, and you can, get video interviews going, and there's all kinds of content you can have on there. And as somebody who watched a lot of like Winamp, Nullsoft video, that was like kind of the dream, right? It wasn't to mimic, traditional TV, because traditional TV sucks, but kind of to make your own thing, to make your own show, to make your own kind of like broadcast loop. And that was really cool. Ustream was just, make sure FMLE is running, and then push the green button, and then pray. And yeah, we didn't have mixers. We didn't have, we certainly didn't have anything like XSplit or OBS. Man, I'm really sounding like an old man right now. You kids these days, and you're easy and cooch.
You don't know how easy you have it. We used to walk uphill both ways in the snow.
Yeah. I used to have to run, 3.5 millimeter cables out of one audio card into another audio card just to get my mic to work and have the game going at the same time. And it was this whole spider's nest of cables and using virtual audio cables. Some people might remember that. It was a mess, but nobody was going to stop us from putting on the best show that we could do with what we had.
And I appreciate you being a pioneer, figuring out all that stuff back in the day, because, it's stupid simple to get a stream of whatever you're playing up these days.
Yeah, and I'm not a fan of MOBAs at all, especially not League, but that really changed everything. Once you were able to get a laptop with like an i5 Sandy Bridge processor that could do H.264 just fine, you could play League of Legends, which didn't really have much in terms of hardware requirements. You could play League of Legends, stream it on, Justin TV or Ustream or whatever, or Own 3D, and you could do that all on one machine using something like XSplit. And all that stuff kind of came around at the same time. You got the Sandy Bridge processors, you got games that were popular and didn't have a whole lot of hardware requirements like Quake did comparatively. And you had something like XSplit. And that's really when streaming took off, just because so many more people could do it. And, it's been going that way ever since.
I remember some games being casted on Justin TV. Some of my games back in Rocket Arena.
Yeah, it was just immediately the best way to get connected to like different games and different communities. Like, you get asked by the Australian Quake 3 1.31 CTF scene to do a cup. And you're like, yeah, sure. Let me get that patch out, and install the mod, and then you meet those people, and it's all it takes. And yeah, that was something I didn't expect to find, but it was really pleasant.
So like on Twitch, like there's an audience, basically, of people, like a chat. Outside of the game back in the day, was there an avenue for people to interact with each other while they're actually watching the video?
Oh yeah, Ustream had chat, and before that, I mean, ITG and QTV had like in-game chat. So yeah, the feedback was always a big part of it, and we all had to learn together. When is a good time to like be, paying attention to chat? When should you just like turn it off and don't mind the trolls? Don't get distracted during an important play. Things like that. That was something we all had to learn. But what we did learn, and I think this applied a lot to the fighting community as well, if you've got people trolling you, you're doing something right. They care enough to like waste their time and sling shit at you. So that's a good thing. But they're willing to sit there and make fools of themselves at nobody's expense but their own. So it's fine. Yeah.
They're motivated enough to type something out and actually hit the end button.
Yeah. It's the same thing in Quake, right? Like if your opponent is starting to, get angry at you and say fuck you all the time, then cool, he's going to lose his cool and lose tournaments. Serious.
I was just talking about that today. I was like, let's see the Twitter gossip, let's see what's going on.
Oh, he messed up. It was good.
What's your most memorable casting moment?
Probably QuakeCon 2014, because that was when the Doom 2 tournament happened. And you talk about, disparate communities of people who are basement dwellers who never really go outside and let alone meet each other and have a crazy amount of detail orientedness towards the game itself. That was the Doom 2 community, and it still is. And the beautiful thing about it was these people have been playing each other and they've been competing with each other, like fierce rivalries for, 20 years, right? And they had never met each other in real life. They'd never been to a LAN party before. They were from all different corners of the globe. And they were able to come in and meet each other in the flesh for the first time, play each other at a low ping for the first time in the same room. And they just wouldn't stop playing. Like, by the time all the other Quake players had left, like they were just like at it. And yeah, they would complain about like little minutia, like, oh yeah, our monitors are adding some latency to our mice and driving all the tournament directors insane with their inane commands. But yeah, you had J-Kiss there, you had Devastation, you had Demon Sphere, who has since passed on. But it was because of that tournament that they were all able to actually meet each other. And Cobalt made those absolutely gorgeous trophies, and the final got played on stage. And you do Quake tournaments, and you get people watching it, and how Quakecon works, where people will kind of filter in for the beer, and if they're not particularly interested in the way the finals going, then you might have half the room left by the time the finals are over. But when the Doom 2 stuff was on, like everybody like was just going completely berserk every time there was any frag, and because it's Doom 2, that was happening all the time. And you're sitting on the stage and the subwoofers are under you, and you hear that SSG just like hit you right in the balls, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And yeah, it was the people factor. It was the fact that it was the game that meant a lot to not only the players but so many in the audience. Commemorating 2 decades of it. Yeah, it didn't get any better than that. I really thought that was the peak, and it hasn't been like an accelerating downhill slope since then, but it'll be tough to top that.
It's sort of like all the dwarves meeting each other on the set of Wizard of Oz, right?
Yeah. Yeah, less fornicating though.
Oh, yeah.
Well, as far as you know,
Far less, actually.
I wonder if we went back and watched any of the videos, if they exist anywhere on the internet, that we could tell that was some of your most memorable casting moments in the making.
I think so, because one of the first maps was Dwango 5 map 1, which is about as iconic as it gets, and it came down to
Love it.
it came down to the last frag for each of them, and it was incredibly tense, and they both shot each other at about the same time, and I think they ended up tying it or something because they killed each other out, and it was crazy. Absolutely nuts.
Definitely got to go back and watch that.
Yeah.
Man, there's so many places that we can go with all of this stuff. Like I'm like simply enamored just at your background and your story and your history. Like I could probably talk to you about this all day long, but we've got to keep it on track here for the podcast here. So with our community events, we do not have a background in in casting a match. You could consider Slip and I, somewhat amateur.
Amateur's not the word, sir.
I think we do a good job. Obviously, we have people coming back and we're learning. What advice would you give, someone like us? Like, what's your approach to casting a match? It feels like I can watch VODs of you casting a match even 10 years ago, and it like you have not skipped a beat. You've only gotten better since then. What is your approach to casting a moment in a match?
I appreciate that. So thank you. But as far as advice goes, I think the number one thing is, especially if I think back to doing like 4v4 Instagib TDM in Quake 2 on just like audio without any video, just do it. And yeah, at the time I was like, hey guys, I'm gonna be commentating your match, so let me just spectate, okay? And this was, of course, a community where it's like, if somebody's spectating, somebody's ghosting. Like they don't want anybody else on that server but who's supposed to be playing, and maybe an admin. So that took a little bit of just like, oh, could I hang out and watch? And that's a little bit more acceptable these days. But and it was just nonsense, right? You're just saying things to fill air, and you're getting a lot of feedback like, oh, you're talking too much, you're not talking enough. What you're saying is just wrong, like you made the bad call about what was going on, like right in front of everybody's faces. Or conversely, you are just saying literally what everybody can obviously see. So what is the point of your existence? All of that feedback is going to come in, and for better or worse, I tried to take that in where I could, but I never let that prevent me from just trying things out or just saying anything that came to the top of my head. Or, trying to find little moments where it is worth going a little bit quieter. And probably the biggest influence for that kind of style is Tosspot. He did a lot of enemy territory casting and quite a lot of Quake casting as well. And kind of his trademark was, getting really quiet and low when somebody was sneaking around a corner, and he came around the corner, and you get all that good shit. And yeah, like any other creative anything, you're gonna mimic who kind of brought you into it. I could never mimic DJ Wheat. I wish I could. I never could. But you kind of pick things up from people like that, and you also pick up things that that, oh, that's probably not to my taste, so I'm going to do it a little bit differently. But in the end, just keep doing it. Don't let anybody stop you from doing it. I'm trying to avoid the phrase "just do it."
just do it, man. Just do it.
But I mean, especially when I'm going into a tournament and I'm maybe the only one doing commentary for it, and there are people who kind of like sheepishly go, "Oh, well, I wish I could do it. I just can't really do it." I'm like, "No, dude, like get on the mic, hop on with me, hop on with somebody. If you are willing to do it, that's everything. Just don't be afraid. That's like 90% of it, really. And yeah, you're going to be wrong most of the time. God knows I am, but that's okay. It doesn't matter."
Do you find it easier to cast when you have someone there with you to kind of play off each other, or just solo by yourself?
It depends, really. I mean, it depends on the person. It depends on the event. Sometimes, because I spent such a long time just kind of like by myself doing Quake 2 or Quake World things because nobody else was willing to do it. And that's why my advice is like, yeah, just get up and do it, because there were a lot of times I was like, man, I wish I had somebody to kind of bounce off of here, or somebody to let me take a breath from time to time. Yeah, I really wish that was the case more often, but I think it did make me have to cover a lot of bases in terms of like the kind of commentary that's going on, like a little bit of analytical to help people out who aren't really familiar with the mechanics or what's going on, a little bit of play-by-play just to keep things interesting, and of course throwing in random bullshit jokes whenever the action is boring. And when you're doing like TDM, especially with like 20-minute time limits and it's like 500 to 2 and you still got 13 minutes left of the game to play, that's when, you take your foot off the pedal a little bit and you just say some stupid shit.
I mean, we're sort of doing it right.
I mean, I could say sort of right if you want.
We just gotta keep on working at it. I tend to see those things happening, try to call things as they happen, and when there's a dull moment, maybe talk about something that's relevant or not relevant.
It's like any trade, is something that's practiced, and in order to get efficient at anything, you have to practice.
Yeah, but also like the mod community, nobody's going to tell you can't make a mod where you turn people into chickens by shooting them. Like, nobody's going to tell you can't do that. As long as you can get a slot on the server and start the broadcast, then you're good to go.
Awesome. Well, appreciate the advice, and we're going to keep on working at that.
Yeah, I had to turn off the chat box and just ignore chat for a long time.
Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes you acknowledge that, it's distracting me more than it should right now. So I'm gonna. It's
not my fault. It's the
no,
chat.
It's always somebody else.
It's the chat's fault.
Yeah.
They'll start talking about my accent and want me to say random words in my accent. I'm like, to me, I don't have that much of an accent, but apparently to everyone else.
Are they willing to pay? Is it kind of like an ASMR type thing? Like,
I mean, I guess I should, because they get fasty when I mention liver mush. I mentioned liver mush during a casting thing, and the crowd just goes wild.
I felt that. Yeah, that was nice. Thank you for that. Saving that for later.
There's some movement.
So have you always had like someone behind the scenes to help you set things up, or have you been like a one-man show? When I discovered you had Boov to help with things, and Rotten Rose was probably also there behind the scenes to help out. But I think the importance of the behind the scenes, whether it's setting up the actual event or just getting the players organized, those things that you don't have to focus on while you can actually cast the match. What was that like for you?
I mean, the great thing about Quake and Doom is you're always going to be surrounded by people who can do things that you can't do. And for me, that was always like adminning things. I've gotten a little bit more comfortable with it with the Tasty Cup stuff, but it's always better having somebody who actually likes taking reports and dealing with fussy players. And I guess I was always the one who pursued the whole broadcast hardware a little bit more. So Rotten Rose probably remembers most of the time where anytime like a King of the Hill or something was starting like 5 minutes before it, I was just like screaming profanities because, my mic wasn't working, or, the video format was wrong and it switched, or my CPU was peaking out and I overheated, or I got a blue screen or a power outage. And so she probably remembers that the most out of anything.
I remember a couple of times like you were having issues with the router, and I think you've come up with backups on backups on backups to.
Oh, there were like a few years where I was just in a location where I just didn't have the bandwidth to stream, and I really wish I didn't have that hole in my record, and I try to kind of like stay in it, but there were a few moments where like, I really am coming back from the dead and coming back from a long hiatus because I just didn't have the resources to do anything. But to answer your question, I mean, you're always going to be around awesome people. Like you three are here. You're all helping each other out. There's nothing to really replace that. And people like Boov, I mean, he's just a constant cheerleader and he gets shit done. He's great.
I miss Boov.
Yeah. Well, we're all adults too now. Like, he hasn't been able to be around as much because he's doing actually a pretty awesome home renovation project that I hope when it's done will turn into like some really great spots for LAN parties. But, things take time.
Yeah. I caught a couple of glimpses of him during the QOL Challenger stuff that he was casting. Yeah.
He casted a few of my matches, I think.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I remember I was in there purposely telling him to call you Dijon. his chat said, "They call him Dijon. He's not D-Ron. Do it."
Such an ass bag, I swear.
That's what I'm here for.
See, you can't get that anywhere else.
So, do you manage all the production at Quakecon for the stream, the Twitch streams?
By and large, no. There were a few years for like Quake Live TV where that was kind of part of it, and then Face It took over, and then there were a few years where my only job was to get on the mic, which felt kind of cush and a little bit weird. Like, you need help? Like, is there anything else I can do? But no, it was nice. And then lately, ESL doing that, and ESL is a proper production firm. There was the one day this last QuakeCon where there was an overlap in the schedule, and ESL was going to be tied up doing the Legends tournament, so we did the first day, Friday, of the Quake tournaments, and yeah, it was fine. Full disclosure, I've been spending the last 6 years in the broadcast industry, so that has been a big step up in terms of capability and comfort and being able to get things like that done and kind of plan around that. But that was lucky.
So who initially approached you about casting, at QuakeCon and at some of these larger events? With id
that. Okay, so what was it? It was 2010. And, it was Quake Live TV, and Quake Live TV was, like us here, like just a grassroots, just group of people doing shit for the fun of it. And Live on 3 was the main, broadcaster for QuakeCon. Like, GGL had done it a little bit before that. But this year it was Live on 3, which recently, kind of went away. And, I mean, DJ Weed, of course, is, really big up in Twitch now, and Scoots is around, and Slash is around. I mean, all these people are still around, but for reasons unknown to me, originally we were meant to kind of do some side stage broadcasting of some lower bracket games or something that they weren't covering, clip maybe some highlights, and then send them the MP4s so that they could put it up. That was kind of our working relationship. For reasons unknown to me, about 2 weeks before QuakeCon, they were no longer able to do the show. So we got the call and realized that we're 4 guys with maybe a webcam between us. And we're asked, hey, we don't have Live on 3 anymore. Can you do QuakeCon? 2010 was a very difficult year. It was the 8th ring of some kind of hell, because part of it was we were inexperienced. We didn't really know what we were doing. The things that we did know what we were doing didn't really come together the way they needed to, because we depended on outside, parties for hardware, for, cameras, for cables, for tables, for internet connect. And of course, that was a year where the internet at QuakeCon was shoddy. Thank God that never happened again. There were more problems than there were successes. That was kind of the year that the spinning logo became a thing, because we just had to leave the stream on slate 80% of the time, because either we didn't have our shit together and stuff was broken, or the tournament didn't have their shit together and there were no games to cover. That was the year I think the tournaments were behind a day and a half, and everything had to get done Saturday. And so that was also the year where okay, well, we missed all these games because our shit was down. Let's just start broadcasting demos. And it's 2 a.m, and Grease Scotsman and I are up there utterly ragged, not only just from casting, but from dealing with all the drama of the day and just trying to churn through matches. But we did it. And for whatever reason, they let us make a bid for the next year, and they gave it to us, which was stupid. I wouldn't have done that. 2010 crashed so hard, it made ESR relevant again. It was awful. But we did it again in 2011, and 2011 was, by and large, pretty successful. And then we did it again in 2012, and that was, by and large, pretty successful. And then, Jimmy quit, Jody got married, the same old story, and Quake Live TV we all kind of went our separate ways. And then that's where, Face It came in and all those guys. But I guess going back to maybe the question about advice, have a QuakeCon 2010. Have a lot of responsibility put on your shoulders that you are no way prepared for, and cry your fucking eyes out every night because things are going so poorly. Yeah, do that. Do that, and you'll be ready for anything else the world has to throw at you.
Well, someone noticed, someone respected that
yeah.
you took that upon your shoulders, whether it worked perfectly or not.
I don't know.
Accolades there,
I think the theme is, Grease Scotsman got me into doing on-air things. Quads got me into doing, radio things. Somebody at QuakeCon, I don't know, maybe they were just out of options and money or time or whatever, but it worked out for us. And after Grease Scotsman, went away, and Slava went away, and Matcom went away, I was still kind of there. And yeah, I got invited back for 2011, and from then on, So here we are.
Currently, who do you like to cast with?
Oh, there's a lot of really great people to cast with. Everybody's so much
There
fun.
are, man. I knew this would be a difficult question. I'm
That
not
is.
trying to put you on the spot.
I'm not going to pick anybody, but no, it's been a real pleasure working with people like Machiavelli. Of course, he's like super OG, but he's also super chill, and he fits that kind of like analyst role to a T because he is that old guy, you know.
Yeah, he's been there.
Sipping some whiskey and smoking a cigar going, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. I was
right. He's like Sarge, man.
Yeah. Way friendlier. He's got like the biggest smile. I think he's got like 90 teeth. He's crazy. I know these guys have been a little bit controversial, but you know, Ketchup and Mustard, Ketchup especially because he's kind of been sticking with it. They are 100% genuine about their enthusiasm about everything there. I don't know, maybe just because they're younger, but even people who were kind of like ragging on them because they weren't, you know, quote unquote from Quake, they're like, well, they did their research at least. They read up on what champions were doing. They read up on what players were doing, and yeah, Ketchup really grew into it, and now he's like one of the best.
Oh, I love the accents, man. They're great. I think they're both great.
Yeah. Zoot, I mean, Zoot's been around for forever. Yeah, he's all right.
You can feel the respect from Zoot for the game. He loves the game, man. It's very genuine.
Yeah,
with Zoot.
yeah. And I think that applies to anybody who's been around for a little bit longer. Is, you know, Quake hasn't always been the most, you know, lucrative thing or the most popular thing, but that's not what's important to us. And I think that applies to anybody who's getting on mic about Quake at any point over the last, you know, 15 years.
So how about some of the newcomers?
Yeah, 40's a fucking riot. He got on King of the Hill and just started spouting nonsense in caps and just making me laugh my ass off. And fortunately, he stuck around and we got to meet, and that was cool. No, there's a lot of young blood, and actually, I mean, the thing that's really changed mostly, and this is applying to all games, is that like focus has kind of moved from commentary to just, you know, streaming yourself playing the game and making that an entertaining show. And that's not something I'm good at all. I don't think I ever will be. But there's a lot of people who do that very well. I mean, Spud Hunter, 40 himself, a lot of people like that.
I attempted it. I don't have that personality. I have to focus too much on the game because I'm old as fuck. So I can't concentrate on playing the game and trying to entertain at the same time.
Yeah. And for a long time,
it takes a special person to be able to do that.
It does, really. And I'm amazed, especially whenever Rafa like just casually is saying these incredibly salient things while he's playing and getting, you know, 70% rail. And for a long time, he wanted to do more commentary, and I'm glad we've been able to do that lately. But for a very long time, like if you were a pro player, streaming Quake was not really in the cards for you because you needed to have a second PC set up, and it meant that you were forced to play at 60 hertz. And, you know, a lot of Quake players are like, screw that. No thanks. But things have gotten easier now. Now you can do things properly, and so you're seeing a lot more pro players putting their faces out there more of the time, for better or worse.
Well, we're gonna switch gears to the Quake community. We've been talking a lot about just QuakeCon in general. You know, you've seen QuakeCon evolve over the years. I don't know how many QuakeCons you've been to, if you've been to all of them, but
no, I'm not as OG as others are. My first year was 06, so I kind of came in at a halfway point.
But since then, you've been to all of them since?
All of them since then, yeah.
So
I don't think I would ever miss a year. It would have to be a pretty big life event for me to miss a QuakeCon, especially since I live 20 minutes from the hotel now.
You have no excuse.
No, I really don't.
Well, us three, you know, we've been playing. Slip is probably 10 years younger than me. D-Ron is probably 5 years older than me. But we've all been playing Quake or first-person shooters for, you know, the better part of our entire lives. But we have never been to QuakeCon, and this is the year. What is it gonna be like, you know, as a first timer in 2019?
You're gonna meet a lot of really awesome people. That is always guaranteed. Beyond that, it still has a little bit of the jank that comes from being a volunteer run event for so many years. I guess it still is technically, but so many things have kind of moved away from that. You know, it is a little bit more of a grown-up event now. And so one of the pieces of jank that's still in there is that, like, knowing what to expect in terms of events or what venue it's going to be at or when it's going to be, that can sometimes come pretty late in the year. But you are going to meet a lot of people who you've known online for years. You're going to meet a lot of people who you've never met before. You're going to be able to play a lot of Quake as long as the internet's up with, fairly low pings. And if you're involved in the tournament at all, if you're involved in the broadcast at all, that's always a magical experience, for better or worse. QuakeCon, it's been through a lot. It's kind of amazing to me that the event is still going with the people involved that have been there since like day one. Like there's always going to be hundreds of people there who still have their, 97, 98 shirts. And that is amazing to me. And there's a lot of people who still go to the BYOC. And admittedly, I don't get to see as much of the BYOC because when you're in broadcast, they kind of keep you in like this aquarium backstage and you don't see anybody. You don't get to interact with anybody. You just drink a lot during the night. And you'll do that too. Don't worry. That will happen. Toilets will be destroyed. Urinals will be ripped off walls and we'll move to a new location. It's all good. But there are people who go to the BYOC and just sit down and just play. And because it's a large BYOC and there's a lot of people who might not even really know what Quake is, and maybe that's the biggest warning to people who come to QuakeCon going like, wow, it's going to be a room full of 5,000 people playing Fortnite. You kind of have to seek out the little pockets of cave dwellers who are still playing Quake World or Doom 2. And yeah, you could just walk around the BYOC and spot them because, it's on their screen. And that's the time it's worth like tapping on a shoulder and being like, hey, you look old. Let's play some games.
Gold.
Yeah. And if you don't meet people there, you'll meet them after hours at the various bars and restaurants and whatever. You'll probably get some t-shirts shot at you by Tim Willits because he's into that kind of shit. It's still a very worthwhile event. Anybody who's been around for a while will tell you that it's different now and it's not like it was. And that is undeniably true. But as a personal experience, it will never not be worth going.
It's going to be interesting. I think, I'm not saying me and Uncounter, we're not near known as you, but I've heard some people say, well, like if you're really known in the community, it's a huge experience. And other people say, like, if you're just kind of the, run-of-the-mill Quake players, like, it's okay.
I would almost argue the opposite for kind of the reasons I said before, especially at the Anatole. We were not only kept in an aquarium, we were kept in an aquarium that was, the next building over from the BYOC. And so there would be years where I never see the exhibitor hall. I never see the BYOC unless I like take a moment to just like walk around it for a few minutes and like make a point of that. There would be years where anybody I see at QuakeCon is in one room, one fairly small room, and it's a group of maybe like 20 people. And that's my entire year. So yeah, there are some cases where depending on where you are, you don't get to do as much at QuakeCon that you otherwise would. That's why it's always like really special to me when I can actually like get a spot in the BOSC and go take my shirt off with the A2M guys and play a few rounds of like excessive Q3 or something stupid like that. And just kind of like recapture what it's like just to be in a LAN environment and just yelling obscenities at people, strangers even. It's wonderful.
And when you say excessive Q3, are we talking about the excessive plus mod here?
Yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one.
I mean, it's bullshit and it's stupid, but it's a LAN party, so get drunk and do that for 3 hours. It's great.
Well, that was the only mod I really played in Q3 because I kind of got thrown into it by my uncle. He's like, hey, play Quake 3. I'm like, okay. Like, hey, play this mod. That's what he's like, download this mod, excessive plus. Okay. And then like, that's kind of what I got used to that and just never really ventured out beyond that mod because I liked what I got introduced to. So
you found your perfect game. Yeah.
Basically for me.
Obscene plus.
Yeah. For me, that was always like Action Quake 2, just Quake 2 Duel in general. Q-Pong, shit like that. Yeah, there were so many like crazy awesome mods that, yeah, you would have people who would just play that exclusively, and that's totally fine. More than fine.
I played Rocket Arena and
Wave
primarily.
Yeah. Right.
I tried my hand at dueling, but I was really bad. I was that guy that would be destroyed like 30-0 or 30-1 at the end.
Yep, same here. I didn't get into duel until Quake Champions because when we first started playing it, there was no CTF.
Yeah.
And there sort of is still no CTF.
Remember, it's in there. It's in there.
It is in there, like Prego.
So a lot of these analogies that you're using about, I guess, the community, like old granddaddy, like curmudgeon, like all this stuff. Do you think that like honestly applies to, I guess, the community as it currently stands?
Yeah, you're gonna meet a lot of assholes in Quake, but it's okay.
We all embrace each other at the end of the day, though. You know.
Yeah, I mean, there will be drama. There will be people flipping tables and blocking each other on social media and calling each other's mothers horrible things in servers, but it's all good. It's all fine. I don't know when it stopped being fine, but to me it's still fine.
I feel
a way worse community. I mean, like a CS community is, I think, a lot more toxic.
Oh yeah,
than Quake.
yeah, for sure. Those people are terrible.
Yeah,
we're all teddy bears in comparison.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think overall for me, in my Quake experience, for most part, I find everybody accepting and understanding. Like you're going to always have assholes in any community. It doesn't matter where you go. But overall, I think Quake is probably one of the most embracive communities I've ever played in. Really,
right. I think any of the negativity, especially on Reddit, probably goes along with their passion for the game, their love for the game, and its roots and where it came from, and how community driven it has been versus now. And that's probably where a lot of their opinions are being voiced on Reddit. They sound negative, but I don't know. I want to believe that their intentions are good, deep under the surface.
Like you said, they are passionate, and that's energy in the system. So
right,
it's movement. I do understand where some of that friction comes from, because like we discussed before, it used to be that, hey, if something isn't right in CTF or Duel or something, somebody would fix it, and everybody would start playing that because that's what everybody wanted. The realities of modern game development, modern AAA game development, means that kind of thing doesn't really happen anymore, and it's an unfortunate thing. It's something I bitch about a lot, but at the same time, it happens for some pretty good reasons, or some pretty unavoidable reasons, and there's nobody to really blame for that except just the fact that these companies are still making AAA level games. And for a lot of them, and for a lot of people who have left the industry, they've gone back to doing something like, Quake 1 or Doom 1, where it's a lot simpler to get content out. It's a lot simpler to, iterate. It's a lot simpler to make art for. That's where we get things like Ion Maiden and A Medieval and even Dusk to some extent. Because, yeah, AAA sucks, man. It takes a long time to get anything done, and when you do a good job, the result of that is you make a lot of money, and when you make a lot of money, then you got to do a really good job again, but now you got to do a really good job with twice as many people, which means you don't know everybody as well as you did, and when you have twice as many people, things take twice as long to get done, and that just keeps happening until you reach some kind of breaking point. And I still don't think this is true of id Software, but I think it's true of a lot of the AAA industry, where we are hitting that breaking point. And that's where John Romero was, once again, a bit of a pioneer, with Ion Storm crashing so hard the way it did. He made all those mistakes before anybody else did. It's tough. It's a tough industry. It's a tough environment to create in. And when you're a community that expects to be able to either have things fixed quickly, or at least have the agency to fix things themselves, then yeah, there's going to be some friction and some frustration, because we all know what we want to play. We just want to play it now.
Do you think it'll ever allow the community to assist in some of the efforts for Quake Champions?
That is tough. I mean, we saw what happened with Quake Live, where as soon as people got the ability to launch their own servers again, there was a bit of a revival there for a little bit. So everybody who was pissing and moaning about dedicated servers being removed from Call of Duty back when that happened, and that was controversial because it was one of the first big online PC shooters that wouldn't have dedicated servers. Everybody who pissed and moaned about that was 100% correct. I wasn't even one of those people. I'm not patting myself on the back, but looking back, everybody who was like, this is the end, this is doomsday.
I remember that. I was part of that.
Right.
Yeah, I was part of that.
Congratulations, you were.
It was modern.
Yeah.
It was Modern Warfare 2. I said, well, that's the death of PC gaming. I remember calling that.
In many ways, it was, and with that, you kind of tie in. Okay, well, selling boxes at Walmart doesn't cut it anymore. We just can't scale that. So you get into free to play, and free to play is great for multiplayer because multiplayer is only there as long as you have multiple players, and having free to play means there's always going to be somebody on the server who just downloaded the game and is trying it out. So at least there will be bodies there, right? You don't run into the Quake 4 problem where nobody bought it, so nobody's playing. So free to play solves that problem. But then, the free word is a problem. You got to make money somehow. So you do microtransactions and cosmetics. And I know there's a lot of controversial opinions either way about how that should be handled. But no matter how you cut it, if you're doing that to make money, then you cannot allow people to make their own, Homer Simpson skins or whatever. It doesn't fit in the same world. You can't sell, a butt flap for $10 and then let people make their own butt flaps and distribute them for free.
Oh God, I remember downloading maps and skins and everything. It was
and maps is a whole nother problem too, because like I said with Doom, you want to make a Doom map, you can start by drawing a square and hit one button and ta-da. Now to have anything that's kind of on par with the visual fidelity in Quake Champions, and it's very high actually. Quake Champions is a beautiful game. If you give those same tools to people like us, nothing would ever get done. I remember when there was a Q&A about enemy territory, Quake Wars, ETQW, and somebody asked the question like, hey, could we get the tools to make our own maps like we did in ET? And they were like, yeah, you totally can. Mega textures take up 2 terabytes of hard drive space. Good luck. And you just felt the oxygen leave the entire room because we all realized that none of us were going to be able to do that. That was in 2005, 2006, right?
Yeah,
so,
I played that game as well. That was a great game actually.
And technically, the tools were there to make ETQW maps. Technically, the tools were there to make Doom 3 maps and make Quake 4 maps and make even Rage maps. And then you open up the Rage SDK and it's still GTK Radiant. It's like, good luck making something that looks like Rage. By the way, you'll need all the compute power and all the hard drive space in the world to make anything. And at that point, you are so far removed from draw a box and push a button that, custom content just goes away. You just
That's very enlightening, actually, to hear that. Like, I never really considered that as the option of why they haven't released that. Maybe they considered it and they're like, well, no one can really afford the computing power to build.
Yeah, because any given map in Quake Champions is the result of 100 plus people putting lots of man hours into it, from materials to meshes to lighting to effects. It all starts in GTK Radiant or something very similar to that, as far as like getting layout in. But to make it look like that, yeah, it's a lot of work. It's more work than anybody individually in the community could do.
How much manpower do they have over there?
I don't actually know, but I'm just going off of like standard AAA scales.
Right.
Id Software is definitely up there. Maybe not 100. I don't know how big id Software is.
Right.
But if you're talking about anything like that EA's putting out or Bethesda's putting out or any large publisher, yeah, it's a lot of people and it's a lot of time, which is consequently why level design sucks now in a single player space, because it used to be, hey, wouldn't it be cool if there was a secret passage that went behind these 2 rooms? And you go, yeah, that's a good idea. Let me draw this little elbow joint and put a few textures on it. Maybe we'll detail it with a couple pillars, and all right, cool, on to the next thing. I was like, hey, producer, I want to make a secret path that goes between these 2 rooms. And it's like, okay, that path will need to be modeled. It'll need to be lit. It'll have to look as good as all the other rooms in the level. That will take 20 people a month to do. It's going to cost us maybe $40,000. How about we don't put that secret path in? And that's where you get, most single player shooters these days, because they're just one room after another room, because that's the only way you can reasonably get anything done.
Right.
Yeah, and back in the day, people didn't really care about the beauty of the game. They turn all the textures off anyway. Yeah. So like we're not living in those times anymore. And yeah, sure, you can box together a map, but it's going to look like those test maps that we saw in the last PTS update.
Yeah.
Well, I play Quake Champions at Ultra for the first like day, and then you lower all your settings so you have a tactical advantage, right? I mean, that's what you do.
Or in some cases, just playable.
Right.
Which was the same story with Quake 3. I mean, Picnic 16 was a thing because, nobody could run Quake 3 very well. It was the first game that did not have a software renderer. You had to have a good GPU to run it.
And now you have to have a good processor.
Yeah.
That's why I built my computer recently.
So yeah, there's a lot of things that suck about the modern era, but I don't think I can pin it on anybody being lazy or making bad decisions or being, a corporate fucktard or anything like that. It's just, if you are a AAA game studio and you're making AAA quality games, these are the realities you're dealing with. And that's why you see so many people leaving the AAA industry to go make things like Stardew Valley or whatever.
I think attention span doesn't help either. People have such a short attention span anymore.
I mean, there's just so much to play. I mean, that is one of the things, because for a long time, Quake was like, if you want to play an FPS, you're playing Quake or you're playing Unreal or you're playing some
mod therein. Yeah,
some mod, and your other options were going to be jank and broken and not work, and thankfully nobody's playing broken games anymore. It's tough now because there's so many things coming out all the time. Even my own personal backlog for like single player things I want to play, like there's so many good things out there to play that demand your attention, and it's in a state where if something like Quake Champions isn't capturing your attention 100% of the time, then there is some other carrot on a stick that is, just as good, if not more fun for you at that moment. And that there's nothing to do about that, really.
Well, I got two questions. I know we didn't write these down, but I got to ask you anyway. I'm assuming you heard the so-called rumor where Saber is like out the door and it's all id taking over there. I mean, do you believe that? And if you do you think it's because Saber just wasn't keeping up with the demand that the people wanted from Quake Champions?
It's interesting because anytime you try to speculate about what's going on behind closed doors, it will always be wrong. There is always some critical piece of information that nobody in the audience or the public has that explains everything, right? There's like one factor, if you've ever worked at a company that has like a public facing sector, that what your clients hear or what your audience hears is like the very tip of the iceberg. And there's like something really big behind closed doors that means that things are the way they are. So I'm not willing to speculate too much about what is happening between those two companies right now. I just know that it's they're all tough decisions, and I know there's a lot of passionate people who are working there who wish that things could be a little bit smoother, but we all do. It's not like we're out here going, hey, we want CTF to work, and everyone's like, oh, those stupid idiots, they want CTF to work, the entitled bastards. Nobody's saying that. I hope nobody's saying that, but there are just practicalities and adulting that has to be done, and sometimes the end result of that isn't CTF that works.
Effing adulting, man. It always gets in the way.
Yeah.
Well, question two, this is kind of a loaded question. You can skip if you want to. I mean, I kind of want to, because you kind of know this guy probably on a sort of a personal-ish level. If John Carmack was still with id,
oh boy.
Yes, I'm just asking because we know he
I
can't.
don't know on a personal level. I wish I did. I've spoken to him
you kind of
two or three times.
Well, you know him better than probably any of us other three sitting here. If he was still there, is this the Quake that you think he would have went with? I mean, just based on
that is an interesting question, and there's kind of two sides of that. There's the technical side, which he invented so much, or he was the pioneer for so many technologies that just worked well. And that was always the thing about id Software games, is that in a world of games that just wouldn't work in like the 90s and 2000s, like id Software stuff you knew would work, and it would be stable, and it wouldn't be weird, and the physics wouldn't, with like strafe jumping and bunny hopping notwithstanding, it would make sense. And even strafe jumping and bunny hopping makes sense because it acts on very specific rules. And when you lose John Carmack, you are literally losing your rocket scientist. And what do you replace that with? You replace it with a lot of people who just by default are more junior and less experienced than him, and there's no replacing that, really. You can't replace one guy who's invented everything with, 20 people who have graduated from DeVry or whatever. You just can't get around it. So wherever he works, I mean, he's going to be like the biggest asset wherever he is. And that's not even trying to puff him up or anything. I think it's just a observable fact.
It's fact, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of it is, from a gameplay standpoint, he's never really been that interested in the Quake that we have grown to know. Not in the way that we do. During the development of Quake 3, he knew that strafe jumping was jank and stupid, and it looked silly. I think those were his words. It looked silly. He didn't like the way it looked. People just going hoo hoo across the map. And so he tried to take the one algorithm that defined all of the player movement and break it apart into different use cases so that the hua hua would be discouraged. And I'm paraphrasing and collating from a lot of different sources here. This isn't like a personal anecdote, but every iteration he attempted there, it would either cause more weirdness because you have, instead of one thing that rules everything, you have like 4 or 5 different things interacting with each other, and that gets weird. Or it just didn't feel good. It like, I'm sure you all realized, like in QCDE, like there's a bit of delay between when you land and when you can jump again, shit like that. And if you're trying to get rid of something like strafe jumping, you need some mechanic like that. And it never feels as good on a tactile level. No matter how unrealistic it is, bunny hopping and strafe jumping feels friggin' amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And to his credit, he threw out all of those attempts to unquake Quake and just said, screw it, let people do what they're going to do with the movement, because the alternative is worse. But I think he was always trying to not drag, that's maybe a loaded word, but he was always trying to bring the Quake gameplay into some space that wasn't the Quake that we kind of all agreed was the standard. So fortunately, it never mattered, because again, people modded, people made content, and whatever he put out in the wild, as long as it was stable, it was going to have content made for it. If he was still added software, it's really difficult to assume what would be happening right now. I just know it's tough without him.
Well, based on what you just said, basically, if he was in software today, we would not be talking about Quake Champions, period. Because I feel like with the way he was, it'd probably still be behind closed doors, doing little tweaks to make it run as smooth as possible with the way he wanted it.
I mean, yeah, we all know how long it took for Rage to get out, right? Like, before that, it wasn't even Rage, it was called Dark, I think. In retrospect, I'm really glad we didn't get a game called Dark.
Dark.
And we get Dark 2 and Dark 3, but there's a lot to be said for those engines that just worked really well. And even during the Rage era, he made some technical decisions that were trade-offs, and I think he would acknowledge that they were trade-offs. So instead of having really good light maps, you had the mega texture stuff. I don't know. I think the people who are actually involved with Quake Champions right now are probably the right people.
I think they're passionate.
I mean, I'm not saying they weren't. It was just an interesting question. I wanted to ask. I mean, I felt like, hey, he can't really technically comment on it, so someone has
it'll
to speculate.
90% be speculation. There's all the what ifs. I think honestly, even that doesn't work, because we have seen people go, screw it, I'm going to make my own damn Quake with hookers and blackjack. And either you make something that isn't Quake enough and Quake people aren't interested in it because it's not Quake enough, or you make something that is so Quake that they go, why play that? I'll just play Quake. So what do? We are a difficult audience to make things for. We want things 2 different ways sometimes. And that's kind of what happened with Warsaw. That's what happened with a lot of different projects. I don't know what's going to happen with the big D, with the big Diabotical. It's very Quake. It's very Quake 3. I don't know if there are enough people who want very Quake 3 who haven't played Quake 3 before. That's why I put a lot of those speculations and questions aside when I see, people who are 40 years old still playing Quake World, and people who are 14 playing Quake World. I'm going to cover another one of Thor's matches over the weekend because it's become like a family thing. And knowing that those people are still out there and they're passionate about it, and every once in a while, the fact that they're passionate about it gets somebody else involved, and that's all I need.
I'm always trying to push Quake on someone, anyone that'll listen.
Same, I do.
Put that damn Xbox away and build a PC, and I'll show you a good game, or better than any alternative that you could potentially play on the Xbox.
Yeah, and part of it is the gaming audience itself has gotten so much bigger. There are people who, even if they play shooters, aren't ready for something like Quake.
No one's really ever ready for it at first.
And that's okay. It's not for everybody. It doesn't have to be.
But there's enough people in the community to help. Like I know myself,
yeah.
I'm willing to help anyone that wants.
And that's the most important thing for sure.
They can get to at least my level of skill, and then from there they can take it wherever.
That is absolutely the most important thing, I think. When I downloaded and installed Enemy Territory the first time I hopped in a server, and I had no idea what I was doing, like classes and bars and reloading and and kickback. Like, it was crazy how much stuff was going on in that game. And it was somebody, I wish I could remember who it was, but it was somebody who just like sat with me in an empty server for like half an hour and just explained everything step by step. And this was at a point where like the game didn't really have a manual. It didn't have a README that had anything really useful in it. So yeah, it took a person to kind of, take me by the arm and show me what was going on.
Yep. I remember those days, and I still treat it as such. And I think a lot of people in the community do. We try to bring.
And that's probably maybe one of the best things about social streaming, just like streaming yourself playing the game, is that people can be watching, and they'll either go, "Oh yeah, that looks cool. I should download and play that," or they are playing and they're like, "Oh wow, how'd you do that jump?" Or anything of that nature. So it kind of makes it a lot easier to respond to people who are interested. And I think that's really positive.
Well, speaking of Quake, I guess the big thing is the March patch. Is it do or die time?
I don't know, man. We've been here before. I think it's easy for a lot of people to forget that this time last year, the game itself was in a much worse state. The game really grew a lot this year, technically, as well as like the community. And yeah, we had, a moment of relative inactivity as things were behind closed doors, just kind of getting all their ducks in a row. But, things came out and things were fine. Is Quake ever going to be as big as Dota or CS or Apex? Nah.
Nope.
It doesn't have to be.
Hold on a minute now. I'm not losing faith yet. I was expecting Quake Champions to be way bigger than Apex. I'm like, Apex what? What is this game? This is garbage.
God bless you. Everyone. That's great. It just doesn't concern me either way. I know who I like playing with. I know where they are. It's all good.
That's a great way to put it. But here's another perspective though. Like, this is a free to play game. Let's just say shit hits the fan and it goes into like maintenance only mode. Like, they can pull the plugs on the servers whenever they want. And that's
right.
what kind of sucks about the situation that we're in.
And then it doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, that is a problem that a lot of MMOs have experienced. And people form relationships on MMOs. Like, those communities run deep, and when the plug gets pulled on those servers, it's traumatic. Yeah, games are an interesting medium, of course. I mean, it's that intersection of like art and technology, and like a lot of other things, it's really difficult to preserve. Not only like technically preserve like the data on the disc, but also preserve like the experience of being in it and playing it. There's a lot of experiences that just cannot be recaptured anymore. And that's a shame. And you're right. There's always the possibility that somebody will say, what is this, Shoot Mania 2, and pull the plug, which is just what happened to Shoot Mania, really. But I don't know if I have any any happy things to say after that. But yeah, it's a possibility. I mean, it's never not going to be a possibility. The game could be doing really, really well, and then a blizzard could happen and everything could go tits up. But that's what Quake 2's for.
No, I'm not saying that I believe that that's going to happen anytime soon. It's just I don't know. I have all the faith in the world in this game. I'm invested. I love it. I'm very passionate about it. I think it's one of the best Quakes as far as, the skill ceiling is concerned and things you can discover, all of that stuff. I do play other games. We've been playing a little bit of Apex Legends on the side. We finally got our first win as a 3-man squad last night.
Nice.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
No, don't you start. I got that win for you. I don't want to hear that. Back up.
You're destined to have many more wins at this rate. Yeah. Actually, could I take a moment to just go over the things I think we really should be thankful about with Quake Champions? Because there's actually a lot of good in this game. I mean, it had a shaky friggin' start. And yeah, Saber's a meme, and abilities are a meme. And actually, the whole abilities thing is really just a permutation on an existing mod, Generations Arena, where instead of having different weapons depending on what character you were, you just have the same weapons but different abilities. It's all stuff that's existed before. Now it's just in a mainstream Quake title. The art is friggin' amazing. The sound system is a little bit dodgy from time to time, and it's still kind of being iterated on, I suppose, but the actual sound assets are really good. All of the actual art in there is amazing. As of this last Dreamhack, not only was it good on a technical level, nobody had any serious problems outside of the kind of problems anybody would have, but the level of the competition was really high. We had Quakecons and we had Dreamhacks where it's okay, yeah, you play Galanavisor, Doom Guy, or something like that, or you play Anarchy, or you play Swarlag. Here we saw just about everything played to a pretty good degree in really creative ways. There were champions that were pulled out of people's sleeves because there was some hidden tech that had been kept secret until the tournament. Competitively, this last Dreamhack was amazing to watch, and the state of the game was really, really good. So now, as it exists, the shaky state of CTF notwithstanding, there's a lot to be thankful for in terms of Quake Champions.
This is my favorite iteration of the game.
That's it. We can just take that mindset and push it onto Reddit and say, "Shut up."
I mean, don't try too hard; you'll break yourself. That's never gonna happen. But yeah, I agree. 2v2 Quake Champions is some of the best Quake TDM I've ever seen. And I'm not just saying that because every other iteration of Quake TDM is forever long and is always a blowout. It's like watching basketball. Quake Champions 2v2 is really, really good objectively, as far as I can be objective.
Yeah, I've had some blowout games in 2v2 where I'm being blown out because my partner, not speaking of any names, does not want to communicate with me.
That would have to be D-Ron.
Hey, I have Rafa level communication.
Sir,
okay?
Yeah, I was about to bring him up.
No, opposite. If we start losing by 5 frags, it's just total shutdown silence.
Well, until Rafa started streaming, I don't think anybody else realized how bad their comms were.
Right.
He set such a high bar. All of us are going, shit, we need to get in shape.
Who can meet that, though? You can't meet that.
Yeah,
you can try. You can always try. That's what Quake's about.
Yep.
Well, that's why we do our little 2v2 blind date tournaments, because we put you with a random person, so you have no idea how things are going to go, because for all we know, you've never played with each other at all before. So it shakes things up a bit.
Yeah, I did that once during Alliance Den. Forget who his name was, but yeah, he kept getting left and right mixed up. That was a bit of a problem.
Yeah, I can definitely see. It's like, hey, none of it go that way.
We didn't last long. It was mostly my fault. I should have been saying left when I meant right.
So we've got Apex Legends out right now, and we've got the current state that Quake Champions is in. We've seen a lot of people publicly switch over to that game, Apex Legends.
Well, yeah, everybody's playing it. I'd be surprised if my mom wasn't playing it. It's good.
Yeah,
it's anybody who's wanted to get into a BRs, BRs have always either been janky or third person, or janky and third person. And this is a first person game with a really good level design, guns that feel good, mechanics that feel good. I mean, I only say this because most people expect me to be critical about everything. I have very little to be critical of with Apex. It's a solid product. Nobody should feel ashamed for going to go play it. It's a fine game. Let's not end the Quake podcast like that.
No. Well, but I will say,
state of Apex Legends.
No, I mean, I don't want to take anything away from Apex Legends. It's a great game, but at the same time, they're like sheep. They'll go where the views are and where the money is and all that stuff. But it is a great game. I don't want to take anything away from that. I will say, however, the D word, the Diabotical game that's supposed to be released, at least the beta to all of its backers or whatever, is around the corner. You touched on it a little bit. You don't know if it's enough to appeal to the same crowd. And there's all these people that have put all of their chips behind it. And there's been nothing but basically just jumping around the map, showing people all of the customization that you can make in the game. And, you know, how easy it is to make the maps with the map editor and all that stuff. I've been paying attention to all of that. Like, I'm going to try it out. I'm very curious about it, but I don't think that game is enough to pull me away from something like Quake Champions. It just does not compare. Like, if I wanted to play Diabotical, I would have played Quake Live, or I would play Reflex, those sorts of things.
Yeah, one of the biggest realizations that I had, and it's one of the most sobering ones, and I wish it wasn't the case, I really do, is that at a certain scale, the quality of the game is tangential at best. You can have a really, really good game that nobody plays. And you can have a really shoddy, half-made game that everybody plays. And unfortunately, I mean, with Apex right now, fortunately, everybody's playing it and it's good. But PUBG, that game is barely an asset flip. You know, it is so basic on a mechanical level, and everybody's playing it. And I've had a lot of really good times in PUBG. I've had a lot of fun with it, but it's very difficult to go, all right, if this game can just get this feature or get rid of this bug or balance the LG like this, then it'll take off. Unfortunately, you know, I saw Warsaw, I saw Reflex, and Reflex is doing better than Warsaw is right now, but, you know, no matter how good those games were or can get, it's not going to matter in the scale that it needs to kind of matter. And it's really difficult to kind of go into, especially at an indie level, like, all right, I'm going to make an indie shooter. Like, you can make a Metroidvania, you can make Stardew Valley, you can make, you know, a Pokemon clone, and you can have an audience that you'll get a lot of really good feedback from, and you can put it behind you, and you can be like, okay, I'm going to work on the next thing. If you're going to make something multiplayer that is meant to last a little bit, either you are AAA and putting out the billions of dollars of marketing to hope to cross that event horizon where everybody is playing it, or you have nothing. Like, those are the two alternatives. And I've known people who have been trying to make indie shooters that are not even really like Quake, like I mentioned, but they're just like more like Descent or something like that. And beyond the small group of friends that they can have to do like test games from time to time, who's going to install that game, leave it running until somebody joins the server? Those are really difficult questions to answer. And yeah, I feel bad for anybody doing a game that relies on multiplayer in 2019. And that includes Diabotical. Like, it could be very polished. And from what I've seen, I think it'll get to that point where it is very polished. And I think it'll have, you know, some really cool features and some cool customization. But there's that very real tipping point where if you don't cross that, you're dead in the water. And it sucks and it's not fair, and you can put all of your heart and soul into something and make something beautiful, and it doesn't matter. I'm going to sip some wine now.
I think we're in a place, though, where both Diabotical and Quake Champions can exist, and I hope so. I mean, I like, I love Quake, you know, but I think Diabotical is going to be a good playoff of what Quake is.
Yeah, I think Diabotical is lucky in that Quake Champions is not setting a very high bar in terms of how many people are playing it to try to beat. It's not a very big number to try to eclipse. But then you have to compare that to, you know, the 25 million or whatever playing anything else.
Right.
And it's really tough to be in that space.
If you had to guess, how many concurrent players does Quake Champions require to stay on point, you know? To
20.
be 20.
Well, how many people are playing Quake 2 right now? Hold on. Let's see, Q2servers.com. Let's see. There's 12 people in the DM server, 11 people in the Rail Wars server, 5 in the Zatrix server. Really, people are playing that right now. 4 people in the Rail server, some people in the German DM server. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll redact my previous statement. 30.
It's alive.
If the servers are up and you have 30 people in there, and anytime somebody wants to duel, they can find one of 29 people. They can be at the bottom of that ladder, but they can find the second most bottom of the ladder person, and they can be best buds.
Yeah, I've made that point to people. Like last year, this time it was in a worse spot than it is now with concurrent player values. I think on the Steam charts last year, it was like from February to maybe June.
Right.
It was really bad, and I was like, you were waiting in queues for 15 minutes.
Yeah, queues are rough at that scale. There is definitely a larger number you need to make matchmaking reliable and time effective. The game needs to be small enough on your hard drive that you're not going to notice it whenever you try to install something else and be like, oh, well, I'm not playing that. Well, I'm going to get rid of that 60 gigs.
Right.
It needs to be cheap enough to host servers for, which is easy for Quake World and Quake 2, not so much for some of these other games. There are a lot of other factors that go into it, but as far as like how many people does it take to keep some number of people interested, well, that question kind of answers itself. It's like however many people are in there and dedicated to it.
Right.
I think it'll always have a presence, at least with custom games. I think for Quake Champions, for me, like not only like the community events that you threw, but custom games, like that's where I spend most of my time playing, and that's where I have the most fun. It's definitely not in the public area.
Well, I think the community's driving it too, like with what you guys do, with the events on Saturdays, and Jehar, even with what you've done in the past, with Koths and the Quake Open League. I mean, that's what's going to keep the game alive, I think.
Tournaments, events, all of that sort of stuff. How about the other D game that's around the corner, Doom Eternal?
Oh boy. Yeah, there was an article that came out a little bit ago about how it's going to have like really good multiplayer, right? And it came out at a time where it felt like it's going to cannibalize us or something like that. I don't know who's working on the multiplayer. Historically, Doom multiplayer has been shipped out to somebody else, so I don't know who's working on it. I don't know what it's going to look like. I guess the only thing I can say about Doom Eternal is that it looks phenomenal from one standpoint, but as far as a follow-up to Doom, it doesn't really look like Doom. Like the demo video had like this long fight with the pain elemental where you're like grappling around and shooting its eyes and shooting the lost souls that come out of it, and the pain elemental has like 8 different kinds of attacks, and it's like a Dark Souls boss. And yeah, cool, but that's not the same thing as, oh my god, there's 20 pain elementals, spam rockets until your heart gives out. I guess the analogy I had there was it would be like playing Mario if every Koopa was like a 10-minute fight. It's like that's just not the same game. Mario's about like Koopa, Goomba, question mark block, get the feather, fly up here, hit the switch, and run across here. And it's like that kind of movement, that kind of like pace, instead of 1v1 a Goomba for a long time. So yeah, it's much closer to like Unreal or Quake than it is to Doom. And so you have to look elsewhere for that kind of thing. But as far as multiplayer goes, I have no idea. I don't think any of us do.
Yeah, it's a huge question mark. I personally I haven't tried. I've seen videos of it, but the 2016 iteration of Doom, and it didn't seem like it would appeal to me. It wouldn't tick the boxes. I think it has a community. I think I've been a little bit unfair to the Doom 4 online community, because there are people who play it. Even Ketchup was like, oh yeah, I'm not going to do his accent, but he loves Doom, and for a long time I was really incredulous of them. Like, really? So you played like once or twice, right? It was like, no, I was in a clan, we had tournaments, and every week we held this event, and we did this and we did that mode. I'm like, oh wow, that sounds like a thing that was going on, and I guess it still is. I just don't have a lot of visibility into it, but maybe I should, or somebody should. It's just a tough game to broadcast because there's no spectator mode. So maybe that's a big question. Will Doom Eternal have a spectator mode? That will definitely drive viewership. Yeah, clip it. There you go.
Will it have all those features that Quake players have had for 20 years?
Was there anything else that we missed, guys? This has been a long discussion.
Yeah, I guess it has been a long one, but a bit long-winded.
think I'm good.
It's been a pleasure for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
100%.
They've been very good questions. So yeah, it's. I wish there was one of these questions where I could be like, yes, next question. But no, you did some work.
I don't think anyone has a solid answer though. You know,
Nah,
it's all speculative.
find the Quake you like, play it.
Absolutely.
If you don't like people, play some single player Doom levels.
I don't like people. That's why I play Quake. It's like,
But don't bash another Quake. I think
go for it.
Yeah.
You know what? If you say fuck Quake World players and Quake World players say fuck the Quake 2 players, then at least they're talking.
we're all within the same family tree. Just our eyes are in different places.
Yeah, and you know what it's like with family. We all know that guy that you got to, go pick up from the cell every other weekend, and make excuses for, and maybe kind of beg them to go to AA from time to time. We've all got an uncle like that.
Effing Bobby, just get your shit together.
Yeah, but you still invite him to Thanksgiving.
True.
He might
I
not
don't
come.
know where I'm going with this.
Well, I think I said this like in our second podcast, maybe third. I don't remember. I was telling people, that no matter what Quake you came from, whether you started at Quake 3, 1, 2, God forbid 4, or even with Quake Champions, we're all part of the same community, and we're all here together, no matter where you started.
Yep, that's what Pappy R called the Big Fuzzy.
Well, I have a totally different description of the Big Fuzzy.
That's okay.
Keep it to yourself.
Well, I think. Before we do get off, I think Deron did have one last question at the bottom here. I'm seeing.
Outside of the top 5, who do you see making a run at any of the tournaments this year? Like a Saber or something more,
Internationally?
Well, no, I'd say NA only.
NA. Damn it, that's a much harder question to answer.
You just don't talk over half the pros when you say NA.
Rafa's pretty good. I think he'll do okay in the future. I think he's on the rise for sure. There's actually a lot of younger people, including Civ, including people like Chain, that have been around for a long time. I mean, the problem is it's tough for Americans. We get jobs, we go to college, we get lives outside of Quake, and Europeans never really had that problem.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a tougher pool, and you get like people who you really think are going to be like the next hot shit. People like Zorak Warren, he does a dumb thing like go to college, and then you get people like CZM who are professors at college now. It would be some kind of poetic justice if they were in a class together. And then you have other people who move on to game dev. So it takes a special person to kind of like stick with it long enough in America to get to that level. So I guess my best answer to that is wait for the next Tasty Cups and find out.
Ooh.
Well, I'll be there. I'll be
Cool.
there, and then you can say my name.
Right on.
Not really though.
Oh, is that what you were hoping for? It was like, definitely you, Deron. Definitely. So,
Well, no, I know where I stand. I'm a middle gold player.
He's past his prime. He's not coming back.
Yeah.
My hands are a little shaky at this point. I could probably take Machiavelli though.
Sir,
Hey,
just sit
fun
down.
fact: I beat Machiavelli on a Tasty Spleen event.
Oh, did you?
So take that.
Take that. I bet this Quake 2 pro, Quake Champions. Yes.
I made it.
All right. To reel it back in here, Jehar, thank you so much. Is there anything that you would like to shout out?
I think I've probably said way too much, but thank you guys.
No, thank you.
Thank you, buddy. We appreciate everything you do. I do, especially. I know it's hard, like keeping Koth and stuff going, especially having a career. it's tough.
It's the biggest pain. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that we were able to, take a peek behind the curtain and get a little bit deeper with some of the questions, and I'm definitely inspired for sure.
So yeah, with that, everyone, we'll see you in the arena.
Keep on fragging. GG's.
GG's.